At about 4:30 on Wednesday, January 10, 2024, I posted on Facebook the words of Ezra 3:13. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. Hear that again. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. I posted that without any comments. Would anyone remember why I might have posted that verse on that date? Yep, that was the moment we found out Nick Saban was retiring as coach of Alabama football. No one could distinguish between the shouts of joy and the sound of weeping. Some were thrilled, some were heartbroken. And there was great noise across the land. Welcome to TV, Tennessee Valley Church. This week we're in the sanctuary of First Baptist Church of Huntsville. Soon renovation will begin on this magnificent room, and we won't be able to be in here for a while. Speaking of sanctuaries, listen once more to Ezra 3:13. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. Here's the story behind that verse. In 587 BC, the majestic temple sat proudly atop Jerusalem's Mount Zion. For 400 years, since the days of Solomon, the temple had been the spiritual and emotional heart of Israel. Their worship, their national identity, all centered around that magnificent building. But then, in 587 BC, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army marched into Jerusalem and destroyed the city, killed many of its people, leveled the city, including the majestic temple. That great temple was reduced to rubble. Most of the people who survived, most of the people of Israel, were forced into exile in Babylon for 70 years. Eventually, Cyrus, the new ruler of Babylon, allowed the people of Israel to go back to Jerusalem. Thousands returned to the holy city. When they arrived on the site where the holy temple had stood, there was a disheartening heap of broken stones. That was a sad sight, for there were first-hand memories and second-hand stories of the marvelous things that had happened there in the temple. A man named Zerubbabel led in the construction of a new temple. When it was finished, those who were too young to have known the former temple shouted for joy, for they were thrilled to have a place called their own. Most of those who had worshiped in the previous temple, Solomon's temple, however, wept. Why the weeping? Because the new temple was not going to be the old temple. It was built on the same foundation, of course. It served the same purpose, but the new temple was just not the same. So while some were delighted that they were going to have a temple they could call their own, others saw the new temple as a poor imitation of the real thing. With the old temple and the new temple in mind, let's take a stroll through the history of Christian worship. Worship in the first century churches was rooted in the form of worship found in the Jewish synagogues, those smaller, simpler worship buildings scattered across the land after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. The early Christians changed the day of worship from Saturday to Sunday in honor of the resurrection of Jesus, which occurred, of course, on a Sunday. But basically, what we do today in our churches grows out of the Jewish worship in the synagogue and the early Christians' adaptation of that. We don't know a lot of specifics regarding the worship services of the early churches. They met in homes and in borrowed spaces, including catacombs. So their gatherings were probably not terribly formal. We know there was music, reading of scriptures, prayers, sermons based on the Bible, offerings, baptism, and the Lord's Supper. But we don't know exactly how they did those things. Over the next few hundred years, the church in Rome rose to prominence, and in time, what we call the Roman Catholic Church was born. When the Emperor Constantine claimed Christianity in 312 AD, it became cool to be Christian, and people flocked from the catacombs to the nearly constructed cathedrals. With that, worship became more formal. Clergy, the ministers, began to wear robes. Incense, candles, and choirs were introduced. Latin became the language of worship, at least in Europe. Thus it was until the 1500s and the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation, which began as an attempt to reform, not replace, the Roman Catholic Church, resulted in big changes to the style of worship for many Christians. In those Protestant churches, local languages replaced Latin. The pulpit replaced the communion table at the center of the room. Teaching of the Bible became far more important. The decorations became much more simple. Many of the images, such as the crucifixes, disappeared. And then the reformers could not agree on music. For example, Ulrich Zwingli, a Swiss reformer, would not allow any music in worship. John Calvin, you might have heard of him, said only the Psalms could be sung. Martin Luther wrote hymns like "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," and the Lutherans sang. The Pietists came along in the 1600s and said singing should be unaccompanied, no instruments. It was about the year 1690, on an early Sunday afternoon in the English countryside, a father and son were walking home from church. The son's name was Isaac. Isaac complained about the kind of music they were using at the church. It was boring, the teenager said, not meaningful. You see, in their church, they sang only songs which had as their text the Psalms from the Old Testament. Of course, the texts were fine, but the songs, Isaac thought, weren't very singable. Instead of reprimanding his son for a rebellious attitude, the father said, "Well, why don't you write some music then for us to sing?" So the boy did. He wrote Christian poetry and set the poems to tunes that sounded like the songs people were accustomed to singing and hearing outside the church. The folks in his home church liked his songs, but lots of others absolutely did not. For decades, his music was resented. It was considered unbiblical, worldly by many. Churches split over the use of these new songs. There were people, in fact, who refused to sing them. The musical movement launched by this young man became a deeply divisive issue in churches across the country and even here in the colonies. That's hard for us to imagine because many of us grew up singing his songs. Songs like "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross," "At the Cross," and "Joy to the World, the Lord is Come." The boy's name was Isaac Watts. Isaac Watts is called the father of English hymns. In the 1700s, some churches had orchestras, but no churches had violins because violins were considered the devil's fiddle. In the 1800s, William Booth, founder of the Salvation Army, thought church music should be jazzed up. So he started brass bands, the kind you might see playing at Christmas time. When hymnals were introduced in the mid-1800s, they were very controversial. People argued that only the Bible should be held and revered in a worship service, not a book of songs. In 1874, there was the so-called War of the Hymn Books. Leonard Sweet told of a church in Houston that had a big split in the 1800s when some radicals in the church wanted to bring in a worldly music machine. In fact, there was such opposition to the instrument, they had to install it during the night. What was that worldly instrument? The pipe organ. Then came the Jesus movement and the rise of contemporary worship. In the 1960s, there was a revival in the United States centered mainly on the West Coast that brought countless young adults into the Christian faith. Along with that Jesus movement came a change in church music. The Jesus people wrote and sang new, easily singable Christian songs, accompanied usually by an acoustic guitar in a folksy style. They often gathered in coffee houses or on beaches, and their songs caught on. Those songs included Pass It On, They'll Know We Are Christians by Our Love, Jesus is the Answer for the World Today, and Put Your Hand in the Hand of the Man Who Stills the Water. Anybody remember those songs? Since the new songs weren't in hymnals, some churches started using overhead projectors, which some of you are too young to remember, to project the words of the songs onto screens. And with all that came what we call contemporary worship. Unfortunately, the introduction of that new contemporary style was the cause of what we usually refer to as the worship wars. In the 80s, 90s, and 2010s, lots of churches fought over the introduction of this new music. The battles were often fierce. Of course, the battles were not about theology. The so-called worship wars were not so much about substance, they were over preference, over style. Sometimes the fights were generational, and members quit and churches split over whether to be a contemporary church or a traditional church. Some churches have blended worship, and there's a lot to be said for that. Blended worship has been called the kind of service in which everybody is equally unhappy. You know, hymns and praise songs with the words on a screen. There are pianos, guitars, and drums, a blend of casual and formal. In our church, we have two distinct services, but I understand why many churches do choose blended worship. They say it forces everyone to sacrifice their personal preferences, at least a bit. No one gets everything he or she would prefer. That's actually an admirable thing. People are reminded every Sunday, it's not about me, it's about us, it's about Him. We began talking about the new temple in Jerusalem that replaced the one that had been demolished by the Babylonians. Remember that? Each was important. The new and the old were important to the people of God for different reasons. My point in going through all this history is that buildings and worship styles have evolved throughout Christian history, and that's okay. We must never confuse our places, practices, and preferences for the worship of Almighty God. When I come back in a few minutes, we're going to talk briefly about what worship really is.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature, so will I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you, so will so will I. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. God of salvation, you chased down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I can see your heart 8 billion different ways. Every precious one, a child you died to save. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
One of the words in the Greek New Testament that we translate worship is proskuneo, which originally meant to prostrate oneself and kiss someone's feet or the hem of his or her garment as an act of reverence. Dallas Willard defines worship as astonished reverence. Worship is not about the sound of the songs or the skill of the speaker or the style of the service. Worship is astonished reverence. The one who worships declares, "If you were here, Lord, I would lie prostrate before you and kiss your feet." I read a story a long time ago about a bunch of guys from the hills who went into the city for a visit. Their host checked them into a fancy hotel room, and for the first time, they saw running water indoors. They were so fascinated by the water faucet on the sink that they spent a lot of time turning on the water, turning the faucet on and off, on and off. When it was time to return to the hills, their host, a man from the city, found the hillbillies in the bathroom trying to detach the faucet from the sink. "What are you doing?" he asked them. "We're taking this home with us," they said. "We want running water in our houses too." The men were awfully disappointed when their host explained that the faucet doesn't produce water. They were surprised to hear that the faucet is merely a vehicle for, a means of tapping into the water. The point is that we sometimes confuse the faucets for the water. And there are many kinds of wonderful faucets. By that I mean lots of wonderful styles and cultures of worship. Some faucets have screens and guitars. Some have hymnals and organs. Some have ornate ceilings. Some have mud walls and plain benches for pews. And when they want light, they open the wooden shutters. Others have padded pews and chandeliers. But worship is neither an organ nor a guitar, neither an orchestra nor a screen. Worship is not a clever sermon or comfortable seats. Worship is astonished reverence. The last book in the Bible pictures throngs of people and angels in heaven surrounding our Creator in worship. In Revelation 4, we read dramatic descriptions of heavenly beings encircling the throne of God. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they have been created and have their being." Those whose hope is in Jesus have worship to look forward to. As one great hymn says, we'll join the everlasting song and crown Him Lord of all. In fact, we join that chorus now, when whatever our venue and whatever our style, we declare, "Lord, if you were here, I'd lie prostrate before you and kiss your feet."
Let me be filled with kindness and compassion for the one for whom you love and gave your Son for humanity. Increase my love. Help me to love with open arms like you do. A love that erases all the lines and sees the truth. Oh, that when they look in my eyes, they would see you. Even in just a smile, they would feel the Father's love. How you love us, from the homeless to the famous and in between. You formed us and you made us carefully, 'cause in the end, we're all your children. So help me to love with like you do, a love that erases all good Father. Oh, let all my life tell of who you are, and the wonder of your never-ending love. Let all my life tell of who you are, and you're wonderful and such a good Father. Oh, that you're wonderful and such a good Father. Help me to love with open arms like you do. A love that erases all the lies and sees the truth. Oh, that when they look in my eyes, they would see you. Even in just a smile, they would feel the Father's love. Even in just a smile, they would feel the Father's love. Oh, even in just a smile, they would feel the Father's love.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly Knupp, Minister to Median Adults at First Baptist Huntsville. We are folks in our 40s and 50s, married, single, and empty nesters. We'd like to invite you to any of our in-person studies, small groups, or social events. Check out our website or email me at holly@fbchsv.org for more information. We look forward to building community and growing our faith together with you.